Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, guys. If any of you are familiar with some of the other sessions I've done on centers of excellence or, hey, I'm a developer, now what happens type of deal, some of the concepts that we talk about here are going to be kind of repeated from some of those other sessions. It's not because I'm trying to pound this into your head. If you've gone to those, it's because these concepts, this discipline crosses so many different parts of working in automation. So to give a little background about me, I've been working with UiPath, not the company, but with the tool for about 10 years. I'm a UI ADP, which is the new UiArd. I'm a certified business analyst. I do UiPath project management solutioning. I'm an Education Alliance, UiPath Education Alliance partner and educator. So I also teach this in high schools and colleges and for UiPath like here. With Anika Systems, I lead their intelligent automation practice and their COE. And if you're not familiar with Anika, we do government contracting. All right. Let me pull up my guide screen here real quick, guys. Now, for these 4 sessions, I'm going to give you a lot of information. We're going to start about the automation implementation methodology this time. We're also going to talk about a program charter, and you're going to kind of get confused. So I want to kind of level set a little bit on what's the difference between a program and a project. Now, this curriculum that we're talking about for these 4 sessions follows the automation project manager curriculum in the academy. If you've taken that, you're going to recognize some of the screens that are going to show up in front of your faces in a minute. So if you get lost on something, or if I'm talking fast and you want to go back and review it, you're welcome to go to the academy. If I don't leave you a lot of time, because we are going to be talking about a lot of information, if I don't leave you a lot of time, ask your questions. Like Diana said, normally I'll just let you interrupt me and ask. This time I'm going to have to ask you to put them in the chat, especially as we get further into these sessions down here, moving the automation operating model to a steady state and scaling. That's going to be a big one with a lot of information. So please avail yourself of the recordings Diana is going to provide to you for those. So today we're doing the automation implementation methodology. Tomorrow we're going to talk about roles. And we're going to go into the automation operating model. And then we're going to kind of tie it all together and teach you or show you how to scale everything that you've learned. So just to give me some, I want to talk about the difference, because I'm going to introduce a concept in this called the program charter. And you're going to say to me, well, Chris, why are you talking about a program charter? Some of you may be PMPs, or you may be CAPMs, you may be project managers, and so you're familiar with the program charter. Some of you will not be. And you don't have to do a program charter for every automation. Your program charter is defining your automation program for the organization that you're working for, or that you're contracting with. In my case, different federal agencies have their own COE and have program charters. So let's talk about the difference between a program and a project. A project is going to be singular tasks. Maybe in our world of automation, it might be a group of tasks that are narrow, targeted, defined, have a definite start and end point. And programs are collections of those projects. Programs don't have a start and end point. They can, but they're going to be an ongoing. Okay, projects are less adaptable. I mean, I'm not talking about whether we're doing a predictive waterfall project or we're doing an adaptive agile project. We're doing a program as a collection of those, and it could be a collection of similar projects that focus on a single department, or usually larger than a team or an organization, a large function within an organization. If you have a manufacturing organization, you may have a manufacturing function and a shipping or something like that, replenishment, core materials, raw materials, things like that. So the objectives are different. Projects are much more focused on the tangible outcomes that you're providing. Programs are more through how those projects complement and interact with each other. And your KPIs and your metrics are going to be different as well. Project is going to be more defined KPIs that are relative to just what that project is doing. KPIs and metrics at a program level are going to be much broader, and they're going to encompass the KPIs that all these different projects bring into the picture. Now, I'm telling you all this because as a project manager or a program manager, but as a project manager, what we're going to be talking about here is you have to be aware of where that project falls within that program and what your role is there. Because if you're a project manager, you're minimizing change in your project. Whereas program managers are trying to adapt to change. So there's some complementary roles and some contradictory roles that we're going to talk about when we talk about program and charter management. We're going to introduce some, and I'm sure if anybody's PMP or anything like that, you're familiar with these. They may have different names than what you're familiar with. I know when I went through PMP, I was able to key onto these concepts pretty quickly. So we're going to introduce this, like I said, the program charter, issue trackers, process design documents, which we all know what those are, PDDs, SDDs, a UAT testing plan, along with scripts, change matrix or change traceability matrix. The solution design document, like I said, we're good with that, a functional testing tracker. That is going to be where your BA tests and your developer tests the different modules, how if you're building A through D, you're building A, B, and C, you're testing A, B, and C, and then you test the integration of those. That's the functional testing tracker. That's done during the development stage. Let's talk about the program charter, because you're going to, as a project manager and running projects, those are all falling underneath the program charter. So let's talk about what a program charter is. A program charter is a high-level document that the organization puts together, and let's say they're focusing it on RPA. This is what we want our RPA program to do. And so that program charter in itself establishes who your stakeholders are, who are the players, and we'll talk about those next Monday. What's the vision and strategy of your RPA program? Let's just assume it's an RPA program. How do they align to our business objectives? And what are our business objectives? Your objectives for your business may be totally different from what you may be aware of or what you may be used to, but how does an RPA program align with that? Because you're setting up this project charter is setting up your guardrails. And through these sessions, we're going to start looking at the different areas of the program charter that impact what we're going to be teaching. So next week, we'll talk about another area of the program charter. What's the roadmap for your RPA program? How are you going to start it? Are you going to do proof of concepts? Are you going to build a business case? Do we have one identified a business case? Are we going to build a proof of concept and we're going to sell it from there, that type of deal? And you want to define your technology. And we get into licensing discussions a lot when we talk about UiPath or other SaaS solutions or technical solutions when we talk about licensing. And I just had this conversation with a federal agency not a month ago where they wanted to limit their licensing and get as much value they could out of the license, but then they wanted to do different types of automations. And when we talk about in their financial world and in their financial systems, and you have to talk about separation of duties, and that impacts utilization. So you have to define what that breadth of technology is going to be, what systems are involved, and how this RPA program is going to be working. What's the security for those systems? Who owns those systems? How are we going to do citizen developers? Are we going to do attended? Are we going to do unattended? What's the split? What do we envision that percentage share is going to be of all of those different components? And then you want to determine the structure. I took the structure part out of this because I think it's more pertinent on the last day of the course of these sessions. So we'll talk about structure a little later down the road, but they're talking about the structure of the program. And you can get as specific as you want in structure, but here they're talking about what's the structure of this. And as you if you decide that you like me and Diana well enough and you sign up next Monday, this will kind of flesh out a little bit more for you. Program vision and strategy. Let's talk about that. It has to be clearly detailed. Do I need to get into the minutia? No, but can it be high level? No, you need to define your vision and strategy well enough so that me as a project manager, or Diana as a project manager, for example, or anybody that's a PMP or a CAPM, can understand what the guardrails are, can understand how they're operating, what they're operating within. And of course, like I said, it has to be aligned with the overall organization vision of the organization, the strategy and vision. And it's a living document. So we may get into, and let me explain this program charter. You may say, well, we're going to start in finance, or we're going to start here, and then we're going to take it and we're going to do everything in finance. And then we'll have another group do their own type of deal, or whatever that might be. But as you get into it, you're going to start saying, well, this system actually sits in our warehouse, and it's our warehouse replenishment system, but I need to rely on that for figures and data in this other system. So we're going to often update our program charter, and that has to be, we can't do that in a vacuum. It has to be communicated beyond just the scope of our little brains. What are the business drivers? I always start getting hoarse when I talk. Excuse me. What are the business drivers that drove this organization to adopt automation? What other automation strategies have you had in place that worked or didn't work? Whether it be Alteryx, Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism, or how are we going to complement the use of those as well? What are the business challenges that we're facing that make us want to do this? Whether we want, and we'll go on into this on the next slide. What are our guiding principles? That's really vague. It's a really vague statement. What's a guiding principle? And that's something that your organization is going to sit down and determine what you're doing here. And insight into the program scope is so vitally important. And kind of like in that finance scenario I just played out for you, that scope's going to change, but it has to be defined at the beginning so you know what to focus on, you know what to put in the pipeline, you know what to reject, you know what to accept. Program charter, how does it align with the business outcome? Cost reduction. I think we've all worked in organizations where they wanted to use RPA to significantly reduce costs and FTEs. Time optimization. This is what we talk about. We're going to revalue time. We're going to free these people of mundane work so they can give more ideation to the organization. And it elevates their employee experience. They're happy. They're satisfied with their work. They want to come to work because they're not doing that mundane stuff. How fast are we going to scale this? Revenue growth. Are we going to grow revenue? Are we going to design new products? Are we going to improve current products? And if we do, how long are they stay on the market? What's the apex going to be before they start declining in sales and we start to discontinue items? Enhance customer experience. This is vitally important when we deal with call centers, or in some instances where we deliver an app interface to a customer and they can interact with the app interface on their phones. What experience are our customers? And this is where a lot of focus groups and things like that come to play. What do our customers want to see? How does that impact our program charter? And of course, improve compliance and regulations. That has a lot to do with not only if you're a public organization, you're subject to Sarbanes-Oxley, but if you're a federal organization, you're subject to even more than that. Okay. So let's start talking about automation implementation methodology. And I want everybody to say that 5 times fast, really quietly, while I pause. Does anybody have any questions so far before I go on? Good. Either you already asleep or you dropped off, or you have no questions. So we're gonna, and I've taught this before, so I know you're rolling your eyes. Perhaps if you've heard this before, say, Chris, not this again, please. But I have to give you this again because it's all part of the automation operating model. Now, if you've gone through the business analysis training, if you're a BA, if you've gone through the project manager training, if you've even done any other sort of training in the academy, you're going to see this subject matter come up a lot, and because it's important. Now, this is not prescriptive. This can be adapted for you. And these may even change depending on how you set up your model. Are you doing predictive, are you doing a predictive model, a waterfall? Some of us know it as waterfall. Or are you in an agile environment where you're doing more adaptive? So these roles can change in any of those, or these steps, I should say, not roles. Kickoff. That's when we kick off the project, not the program. This is the project. Now you have a kickoff for your program, but now that's why I wanted to kind of baseline us on what the difference between a project and a program is. Kickoff is where we're setting expectations. This could be at a program level. More than likely, it's going to be at the project level. Are we ready to do this? What are my infrastructure needs? What's my environment look like? What's the communication look like? Do I have a change process envisioned in my brain? What's my statement of work? Am I agile or am I waterfall? Those are all part, and the biggest part of this, and this is where most projects fail. Most projects fail at the setting expectations, because if you don't set good expectations, your customer does not know, or they think you're disappointing them when you don't deliver to them what they have in their brains as what they expected to be delivered. These have to be realistic, documented, agreed upon expectations between you and the project, or the process owner, or organizational leads, whatever that role may be. You need to set those expectations very early on, very concretely, and they can change as your automation program evolves, but they still need to be clear and agreed upon. You don't want any surprises where someone's going to come say, well, that's not what we expected. Now they're disappointed in you, they're disappointed in your efforts, they're disappointed in the whole idea of UiPath RPA or any other RPA program. Business case and technical evaluation. You may not have a pipeline to work with. Now, in their minds, when they started to get this idea that they wanted to buy UiPath and get some licenses, some studios, spin up some servers, they have in their heads an idea of what they want to tackle. They don't necessarily know if it's RPA compatible or not. They just know that these are repetitive processes. They don't understand the concept, okay, how many screens am I touching? How many steps am I doing? What are the security needs? What's the impact to Sarbanes-Oxley? What kind of documentation do I need to do? What's the level of effort on that documentation? They don't necessarily have that in their brains. They just know, I want to do all of these processes, and it's our job as project managers to sometimes pull them by the shoelaces so that the balloons don't carry them too far up into utopia land with rainbows and flying unicorns. We want to, again, this goes back to setting expectations. You want them to be grounded. Delivery timelines, what are they expecting? And this is when, in my line of work, we get into what we call MVP, minimum viable product, or technical debt. So we may start an automation, and the government agency or any other customer, I'm not just going to say it with government, may say, okay, I want this to do this, and but I also want to do all of this, but I need these first 3 steps by a certain date, delivery date, and everything else becomes technical debt. And that technical debt is what we put into backlog, right? And we prioritize that backlog either through Scrum, or we prioritize it just through constantly talking with our clients. And we say, okay, you got an MVP, that's a minimal viable product. When do you want these other iterations to that same process added? Use cases. This is the easiest way to establish a RPA program at a project level, is to do a really simple use case. Build a business case, justify your business case, build a POC, proof of concept, demonstrate that proof of concept, make sure that it has some quantitative metrics that you can show, this is what this can do for you. Don't just make it qualitative. Don't say, well, Susie Q now doesn't have to sit at her computer for 2 hours and do this process, because that's only impacting Susie Q. You want to identify the downline impacts, the upline impacts when you do your POC. You want to make it robust, but not so robust that you can't do it quickly, and it becomes more of a project, a large project than just a proof of concept. Agree on definitions. I cannot tell you how important this is. Definitions surrounding complexity. Like I said, they're going to have a different idea of what's complex than you will as someone that's familiar with automation. A number of screens, security, downtime on the system. I don't know if any of y'all have ever coded in SAP without the platform and the SAP connectors, but coding in Fiori or dynamic user interfaces where it's dynamically pulling those images and those prompts up onto the user interface, and they don't have good selectors or grounded selectors. What are the factors they're looking for in return on their investment? What is their investment? And how fast do they want that payback period? That's going to determine how many automations you need to do within a certain time. And you want to always give them quantitative metrics. You want to be able to produce automations and develop your metrics and your KPIs, your SLAs, whatever they might be, to show them and be able to demonstrate them the benefit of what you're doing. If you're just saying to your client, well, these people won't have to do this anymore, translate that into return on investment. Translate that into numbers, because business leaders understand numbers and not more than they understand qualitative benefit. Process analysis. This is where we're doing the PDD. This is where you can do benchmarking. You can do research into the industry. What's the normal process? How long should this take in other companies? How do other companies do this? A little bit trickier because you're not going to get a lot of company secrets unless you want to go into the whole espionage thing. But first thing is as is. What's the steps as is? And you can use swim lanes. You can use Visio, just regular outputs. I mean, BPM. I think that's the name of it. You can use any type of model that you want to develop to show what the as is process is. Make sure it's detailed enough and captures everything. Work with your SMEs. Make sure you understand what an exception is. Make sure they understand what an exception is. I always use the example of someone that, let's say I came into the organization. You've been doing this. Diana's been doing this process for 15 years. She's got a promotion, so I'm coming in to take over her process. And over that 15-year span, Diana knows that if the computer system does something weird like this, I'm just going to push that button and it solves that issue. Well, that's an exception, whether Diana's just accustomed to do it for the last 10 years. To Diana's just what you do. To an RPA, to a bot, that's an exception that we need to build in. So we need to really help our SMEs and process owners understand what a bot does, what an automation does, what we need from them in order to build a successful automation. Because another big point of failure for your automation is going to be bad information or incomplete information coming from your SME. They need to understand that if you change the order of columns, that's going to impact what we do. We could build the data service model in UiPath Automation Cloud. We could do relational data sets, but still we need that information. And if they decide, well, that we don't need that in this report anymore, it made it look big, bulky, that's still something we need to know about. And your SMEs need to understand that. So we need to make sure that they understand those inputs, because you don't want your two failure points are going to be the expectations and your SMEs. People are people, right? Expectations are expectations, right? We can all dream about unicorns and flying pigs. Doesn't mean that's a reality. And then we can come up with our suggested to-be process. What is this going to look like in automation? And be able to explain why it's going to look like this in an automation. Sometimes your client may have, or anybody in your organization may have, this idea that we're just going to do STP, straight through processing, call it STP. And in some organizations, especially if you ever work in the federal environment, they don't want STP. They want humans involved at different steps, because that's how they are designed. That's not only the history of the government, but it's also the lack of the security of the government, I should say. So You're suggested to be you need to explain what the bot's going to do in this. Is the bot going to do the entire process? Is there a human in the loop? And was it HITL? HITL? A human in the loop. I love acronyms, by the way. Can you tell? So that to be process and that as is process, if you think about it from a PMP or a CAPM, it's kind of like a gap. What's the gap between those two, and what are we doing to narrow that gap in that process? And a UAT plan. I know you may think to yourself, well, that's awful early to do a UAT plan, but this is where you want to do the UAT plan because you're working with the SMEs, you're working with the process owner, and you're finding out from them what pieces of this do you need to test? What do you want to see in UAT testing? And then they will give you a broad answer. Then you say, be more specific. What parts of that process do you want to be in a UAT plan? Right? Solution design, future state mapping modules for automation. I do this on whiteboarding. I don't know if any of you have ever done whiteboarding, or we get the big Post-it notes that hang on the wall, and we map out the modules. In this module, we're going to build this. In this module, we're building this. And this is particularly helpful if you're working in an adaptive or an agile environment, because then you can assign stories to them with the correct completion criteria for done. So I like to whiteboard because you can erase and you can redo, you can talk, you can split arrows out, you can do all kinds of things before I actually give those to the developers saying, okay, this is what the solution is going to look like. And you may not even have a solution architect in your ecosystem. It may be the developer working with the business analyst, and you may not even have a business analyst in your ecosystem. Your developer may be going from the front end of the process all the way to hypercare. Okay, but you want to make sure that you map it out and do it in modules. We never want to build a straight through process as a best practice. We want to make sure that we do it modularly so we can maintain it modularly. So that one module may fail doesn't mean everything else in the automation needs to be recoded. Access tracker. Some people call it a architect tracker, architecture tracker, whatever it might be, whatever you're calling it. This is listing all the systems you need, the contact people, the owners of those systems, the security around those systems, what access you have to those systems. Because remember, when we're going into systems, we want to limit the access to the bot in those systems to only what the bot needs to do in that system. You don't want to give a bot admin access to a system to where it can do everything. You want to limit that. So that's access tracker. Helps you to do that, helps you to keep track of the bot's doing this in SAP. It's running these boppies. It's going here in Fiori. And we're limiting it in our GRC model. And that's all it's doing in this automation. And that's also going to help you with segregation of duties because your bots are just as susceptible to segregation of duties as you are as people. A bot cannot populate its own journal entry, for example, if you're a finance person, and then approve that journal entry and upload that journal entry. You got to have some segregation of duties. Functional testing. I talked about that a little bit earlier. We're building A through D. We're building A modularly. We're testing A. We're building B. We're testing B. We're building C. We're testing C. Then we're testing A, B, and C's integration to each other. And we're going to continue this iterative testing process all the way to the end when we do this whole complete test at a developer level before we turn it over to a BA. Now, if you have a BA on staff, you're going to give that code to a BA to test as well, because your BA is going to be in a different laptop and accessing the systems differently than you may have done as a developer. So you want to make sure before you turn it over to UAT that your business analyst or someone else in your organization has tested that. And this is where you're preparing your solution design document. You've already got part of this prepared if you have a solution architect, and your developer is going to prepare the rest out. Here's the packages I used. Here's the version of the packages I used. Here's what this code does. Here's what this code does. And I stress this with all my developers, and I have many of them that report up to me. Labeling and annotating when you're developing And we'll get into that in a minute, but I cannot stress the importance of that enough. Okay, solution design. Look, we only have 3 more slides up. Am I good on time? Yeah, I am. Development and testing, creating modules. We talked about the modularity, coding. So know your customer. I cannot stress knowing your customer well enough, and know what you're doing. If after hypercare, you're turning this over to a support team to run, and you're never going to touch that again, you don't want to use long-winded LinQ code. That's going to be hard for somebody to understand. You don't want to do a lot of regex because your support team may know nothing about regex, right? You want to, and I tell my developers all this all the time. I understand you can code. I understand you can do some really good things with code, some fancy things. I can do the same, but the client cannot. So you want to do as simple as possible. You have in many instances, you have many happy paths you can take. You want to take the happiest of the happy paths, right? That happy path needs to be reusable is good, stable is excellent, repeatable is excellent, and that lower maintenance. You always, when you're developing, we shoot for a goal of 90% run, 10% maintenance, and even smaller if you could get it that way. And that's a lot of that's going to depend on your developer knowing all the exceptions, not getting too fancy, not getting too I don't know how a better word for this, but uppity, saying, well, I know how to code, they don't, so I'm just going to do it like I do it, right? So we want to make sure our code is good and functional testing is good. And this is where we're going to go into things like code reviews, peer code reviews. And an organization I worked with years ago, we had 2 different COEs in this one organization in our North America division. And he and I developed a code review team. And that way I was reviewing his developers' codes and he was reviewing mine. So having that second set of eyeballs on there is excellent. Runbook development. This is where you're putting, it's an instruction manual. You don't have to be a technical writer to write an instruction manual, but you have to provide an instruction manual to your client because they need to know how to run this automation. They need to know after you leave and you pick up your belongings and get your plant out of the cubicle and you grab your Stanley mug. They want to know how this is going to run then, because they don't want to pay you. If you're working for a firm or consulting firm, if you're working for yourself, you've already moved on to other things. You've already done other things. You don't want to go back and revisit something you built a year ago unless you absolutely have to. And I can tell you, a customer is not going to be very keen on it to pay your organization to come in and maintain something that doesn't work anymore. That's when they find different consulting firms. Testing and running UAT scenarios. The developer and the business analysts are going to do this. This is different than functional. This is end-to-end testing with test data. You're testing the scripts and developing the scripts for those test cases in this step. You have this UAT plan. You know what they want to test for. Now you're developing the specific scripts. They want to make sure it logs on. Well, did it log on? Did this page appear? Did any pop-ups appear? Did it find the login field? If you're going through a thick client like Citrix, is computer vision capturing everything? Does the screen change? Those are the things that you want to test, pretending yourself to be an end user. Okay. And here again, I want to talk about annotation and labeling. In our organization, every assign is annotated. My developers get frustrated with me because I said, okay, you didn't annotate this. Well, I'm just assigning a new business rule exception to null. Why? Why are you doing that? Pretend you're the customer. Why do we do this here? What's it doing? So you want to annotate that. And remember, you're not going to see annotations in log messages. You're going to see labels. So you also want to label each of those. Don't use assign or write cell, and on the next one say write cell again. run your UiPath workflow analyzer, find the errors, find the inconsistencies, give them good code. Give them annotated code. I don't care if your annotations are this long and your code is just one quip. Annotate it. Annotate your invoked modules. Annotate, because that's going to speak to your customer and say, look what they left us with. They left us with good work. I can't tell you how many times my developers have walked into a situation saying there's no documentation. I don't know what their code's doing. We had to dig through their code just to find what it's doing. I've had to do it myself in the past. Annotate and label. Critical when you're developing. And you don't want to have to go back and do it as you build. UAT, you're doing UAT with the implementation team. Some organizations are blessed enough to have testing directors or UAT, specialized UAT directors, testers, things like that. Most organizations don't. Your testers are the end users. Number one, you have to understand that your end users are still a little nervous because, yeah, I don't have to do this anymore, but yeah, if there's a lot of this that I don't have to do anymore, am I going to have a job? So they're going to want, you have some testers that are going to want to find fault. They're going to want to make sure, they're going to want it to break. And I have this guy I worked with, his name was Jeffrey. And I built, and I've told the story before, I'm sure you heard it if you've been at any of my sessions before. Jeffrey's goal was to break the automation. And I would build the automation. He'd take weeks and sometimes a month to test this automation, trying to break it any way he could. Not to be mean, to make sure it worked. To make sure it worked under any scenario, anything that could go wrong, with any exception. Jeffrey's goal when he was doing his UAT was break the automation. And he did. He broke the automation several times. And I went back and he said, he said to me, he'd say, well, it didn't do this. I said, well, how often is that going to even happen? He doesn't care. I made it happen. That means it can happen. So you want to do a really good UAT testing. Don't give them 3 or 4 days. Give them a couple weeks to really test it, really test the stress of it, stress test it with a lot of data. So you want to, UAT is critical to the success of your automation. Run all your scenarios. Run the happy path. Run the unhappy paths. Show the errors, show the pass, show the fails, and fix those before you release it to hypercare and production deployment to production. And you want to complete a run book of your tests. This is what we did on these tests. This is what the performance was. This is what we planned on the performance being. Did it meet that expectation? If not, this is what we did to change that, and we retested that. This is what we expected to happen. This is what happened. And this has to be very detailed because it's going to be part of the documentation you're going to turn over to the client or your customer at the end of the day. And you always want to keep up with any changes that you have to make, document your changes. It's funny because usually in these 2 stages, you're going to have some change requests. Can we add this to the automation? Can we do this with the automation? And a change can happen. So some people say, well, we don't do changes after solution design. Well, a change can literally happen at any time in the automation process. You don't own the automation, the client does. If the client wants to change what they own, they're allowed to do that. There are 3 different change types in my world. I guess you could say there's 4. A normal change, a standard change, a major change, and an emergency change. You could do nothing about an emergency change. Your system's interface has changed, and you don't own the system. It's a cloud-based system owned by a third-party SaaS solution owner, and you're just using what you pay to use. And that UI has changed. That's an emergency change. You have to do that. A normal change would be something that impacts, and that's why I don't use major a lot, because normal and major kind of are interrelated. A normal change is something that may change the original process design. You're adding another what if or a flow decision into your automation. We need to go to these people now instead of these people. That's a normal change. And for normal changes, we always document that with any change, we document them. Let me say that's a given. But with a normal change, we document who's asking, why are they asking, and we get sign off and approval on these. In some organizations, you will actually have a change control board that will evaluate all changes to what you're building and make sure that all these changes are approved before you put them into play. And sometimes that board will decide, no, this is not something we need on this particular MVP. We're putting it into the backlog. And then you have a standard change. A standard change would be something along the line, doesn't change the process design document. It's going to say something along the lines of, can we have a log message here? Can we put another email, a name on the email address in your config or in your asset? It's going to be something you can easily do that's not going to change your design. You don't need to get approval on those necessarily. But anything that's a normal change or emergency, not emergency change, but you have a major change, which I avoid, those go into the backlog. You need to have those documented and signed, and you need to track those. What the change was, who approved it, why it was made. I know this sounds like, Chris, you're overwhelming me with documentation. I learned a lesson from someone that I worked for. I reported to her one time. She said, if you don't document something, it's going to come back and bite you. And I'm not going to say the word that she used in that. So I learned very quickly to document everything that I did. All right, looks like we're almost done. I may have, I'm still at 15 minutes. Maybe we'll do have time for questions. Deployment and hypercare. Who's migrating it to production? In many instances, you are not the person that's migrating it to production. This little guy here is being done by your IT group. Because in most instances, some instances, you have the ability to migrate it to GitHub or Git or Azure version control and create your branches. But that's usually done by an IT person, not only because of the branch structures, but also security and integrity of that. So who's migrating into production? What's the process? What's the deployment process? Some organizations have a step-by-step list you have to fulfill for deployment, reviews, demos. What's the documentation look like? Things like that. And then reviewing and monitoring the production cases. This is something that's typically done by a BA. At this point, the developers really only doing break fix and updating the run book with new instructions as needed. The review and monitor the production cases, making sure that the automation is delivering what was promised to the client in expectation setting, is delivering that value, is doing what it's supposed to do. Now, if you're not fortunate enough to have the benefit of the BA and that falls on your shoulders, and that's what you're doing. You're reviewing and monitoring those production cases, and you're watching it while it's running in production. Project closure, and I'm sure you're tired of hearing me talk by now. Have the task been fulfilled? Did what you agreed to do for us get done? Did we love you or not? Here's all the documentation, run book, your change matrices, your UAT testing and results, all that documentation you've been building, the PDD, the SDD, that all belongs to the client. None of it is yours to keep and play with. That all belongs to them. Do you have to do any contract completions? Do you have to, is there a financial impact? Do you have to have everything signed off? Do you have to get paid to have certain things done? Or do you only get, I should say, do you only get paid when certain things are done? Are we really done with it? Are we really closed on it? Does your developer have any regrets on what he built? Does your BA have any questions on the UAT testing that makes him a little bit nervous? That you need to tell or document and tell the customer about? Because those are going to all come back to you as the development team and say to you, you did your job well, good job, young man, or you did your job poorly, we'll find somebody else to do the next one. And that's the automation implementation methodology. Again, it's not prescriptive, and you won't have the people necessarily on hand to do all these roles. You may have to wear more than one hat. But I will urge you and encourage you to follow the automation implementation methodology. It'll become like second nature to you. you will be more keenly aware of what project management actually is, because this implementation methodology, if you've ever studied for a PMP or a CAPM, you understand, or any of the other PMP certifications, you understand that this is something that happens in any project. UiPath may have different steps here, but it's basically the same for any type of project that you're doing, whether it be automation or not. And it's good practice to get into. I have one PMP I work with that is she's just obsessed with this, and she plans her whole world in projects. And I think it's a little creepy, but it's how she operates it. She's able to do it well. All right, I'm gonna quit talking now, Diana. Any questions from anybody?
You do have a couple of questions. So one is, who would be tracking access to systems at the COE level? And will the bots license itself be segregated at the infra level in the case of highly classified data processes?
Highly classified data processes. Assuming you're talking about some that include PII or controlled information. If you're ever worked with the government, you know controlled information. PII, I think we all know about.
Controlled info.
Controlled info. Who controls the licensing? Is that what the question was after that, Diana?
I think there's two questions. Who would be tracking access to systems at the COE level?
Right.
And will the bots license itself be segregated at the infra level in the case of highly classified data processes?
Okay. So let's address the first question. Who decides who maintains that system access? That's something that your BA typically does, or if you're blessed enough to have a solution architect. And I don't envy the world of a business analyst, because they have to make relationships with a ton of people, and sometimes people aren't nice to work with. Developers are more, if you're in an automation implementation methodology and you have the BAs, like we do at our organizations, we pair BA with the developer. That BA is the face of the automation. Your developer is building code and maintaining and doing the break fixes. Your client very rarely sees the developer. They're going to see the BA. So the BA is the one that works with the IT team to do that access tracker. What systems am I going to need? And if you have the solution architect, she's going to be a part of this as well. These are the systems we're going to be touching. This is the access we need. Who's going to give that to us? And that needs to be done early on, probably in the kickoff stage where you're talking with the IT team, because you don't want to get to a developer and have it sit on that packet of information, sit on his desk. If that developer's building from a PDD, a keystroke PDD, and have him waiting for access to systems that he doesn't have access to. On to the second question was, we would limit licensing to the bot. We do that if you're fortunate enough to work in an orchestrator environment. We're gonna limit those roles to that bot within that orchestration environment. So that bot only has limited roles. If you're working with controlled data or PII, that bot only has limited roles in those systems. So we're going to limit those through orchestrator, because that's the easiest place to do that. Some organizations have separate systems that would handle that for you. They may have different login information in CyberArk or in Key Vaults that you have to use for that automation based on what systems it's entering. Because I've done that before when we're entering into HR systems where you're actually dealing with employee data. In those instances, we get a lot of fake data. We have the SMEs and process owners give us fake data of fake people, so we never see real data. And then we'll restrict the bot either through orchestrator or through our CyberArk Key Vault. Does that help answer whoever asked that? I guess maybe it did.
Yes, it does.
Nobody else has any questions?
Yeah. What covers know your customers?
What covers know my customers? Know my customers. All right. I'm going to tell you a story about Nancy. And Nancy had worked for an organization that I was building an automation for her for 40 years. Nancy was very nervous about RPA. It's new technology. Nancy had been doing everything the same way for 40, well, I guess about 25 of those 40 years she was on this particular task. She knew the task. She knew what she wanted. She knew it well. She can plow through it. But the organization wanted her to get that over to RPA. Nancy had specific requirements, specific formats, and we did everything we could to make sure that Nancy was happy, because Nancy's goal was to find something wrong with that automation in the output. And Nancy picked through that output like you wouldn't believe, trying to find a reason to say to them, see, it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. I could do it better. And Nancy had this fear in her head that she was going to lose her job. She ended up staying on and retired from the organization, but people don't necessarily understand we're taking away mundane from you because all they've done is mundane. That's their job. They've been accustomed to that, and they're happy doing that. Now you're taking that away from them. Know your customers. Know what the goals of your customers. Know what the attitude of your customers is. And some project managers will even keep, and these are confidential within the project organization, not the client. Will keep a list of stakeholders, what their preferences are, what kind of people they are, not disparagingly, of course. When is it a good time? What are they someone we inform? Are they somebody that's going to make a decision? Are they someone that's just accountable for something? Kind of like the RACI matrix. If any of you are familiar with PMP or CAPM or project management, the RACI matrix, kind of keep track of who these people are. Because if they're just someone you need to inform, they may be somebody that's a user is not even vested in it, but they're going to be using an output from it eventually. That's a good way to understand your customer, is just to identify it, talk with them, laugh with them, laugh at their dad jokes. Ask them how you can help them. Ask them if they can't give you the answers to your questions. Well, do you know who can? Is there some documentation I can evaluate? Those kind of things. Know where they're coming from. Not everybody wants RPA. Not everybody wants Gen AI or large language models. They all have different motivations, and it's your job as a BA. This is typically somebody that's a BA or the solution architect. It's those persons that are responsible for getting a beat on who their client is, your customer is. Know what their priorities are, as we talked about in the program charter. Know what are they looking to reduce their costs, because that's a totally different customer than someone that wants increased value. Are they wanting to put out products? That's a different customer than somebody that wants to stabilize an environment. You really need to be keenly aware of who that customer is so that you can get the right information, elicit the right information, prepare your developer, and have a much smoother process. I hope that answered the question.
Okay, and then Cole has some questions for you. How do you overcome bias testing? In other words, before UAT with a client occurs, there's internal testing.
Right.
Developers could be passionate, sensitive to their code, and may subliminally avoid testing certain things.
Right. This is where I bring in a BA to do the testing. And we always do it at my organization. We'll have the developer test, functional test. I call it alpha testing. People call it functional testing. I don't know where I got the word alpha from, but I just go with it because it makes sense in my head. And then we have a BA that does testing before we turn it over to UAT. And we even have, in some instances, we'll have other developers test it, or the solution architect test it, or your project manager test it, if you're blessed to have one before you turn it over to your client. Now, if you're the developer and you're going from the front end all the way to hypercare, you can get passionate about code. I get passionate about code. I know what I'm doing. I've built 500 automations. I know how to build automation. I know the best practices, but I cannot control a developer or that is not attuned to the client, is more attuned to himself. And unfortunately, in that situation where you have one developer that's wearing all the hats in the automation, that developer is going to have failed code, and that developer is often soon enough going to be standing to be replaced, because an organization's not going to, if your code's failing all the time, there's something wrong. And I think your organization's the key in on that. But have other people test it. That's my first recommendation.
Yep. And that was the end of the questions.
All right. Next Monday, if you don't forget, next Monday we're talking about roles in your organization. And again, some of you may roll your eyes and say, "Hey, we've talked about this before," but we're going to view the roles in the organization from a project management standpoint and not a developer standpoint this time.
Oh, one more little comment came in. You
Right.
say a BA and a developer can do testing, but it is not easy to get qualified tester to do so. They know what aspects to test, coverage, etc.
Right. And so when we do our UAT plan in the beginning, we're working with the subject matter experts and process owners during kickoff to say, okay, these are the areas I want tested, right? So we have a test plan. And it's up to the developer, solution architect, your BA, whatever dynamics of that role, those intermediate roles that you have, to come up with test scripts. And those test scripts have to be signed off by your process owners and SMEs. That whole testing plan with the test scripts has to be approved, right? Your SME or process owner will say, well, I don't see you testing this. And then you test that. So you're always going to have a test path, I guess is a good way to say it. So that you don't selectively test. And I think that gets back into bias. And your BA is going to be, by this time, your BA is going to be more intimate with that project than you are just by coding that project. Because if you think about it, in a project management structure, a coder is just a cog. Your BA is unfortunately their BA, much to the dismay of many developers, including myself sometimes. Your BA is more of a face of it. Your solution architect and BA are more the face of the automation. They may know more about it than you do as a developer. So it's always good to have your BA project manager. If you want somebody that's unbiased, bring your project manager in and have that person test it. We're never going to fully get rid of bias in testing. It's not something we're ever going to do, because yes, developers get very protective of their code. But a lot of that has to do with the environment. A lot of it has to do with the management and leadership. And to be in the honesty and integrity that you're presenting to the customer. I hope that helped.
Yeah, that was the last one.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Chris.
Thank you very
Hopefully
much.
everybody's looking forward to the next session. And we'll see you next week. Appreciate all you guys coming tonight. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.